Welcome to this episode of the Partovi Effect. My name is Mrs. Madi Partovi.
And I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi.
We're coming in hot today, but before the hotness, just a little bit of chit chat.
Housekeeping, if you will. And even if you won't.
Yeah, I've been going to the gym.
Yeah.
Yes.
Congratulations.
We're on the eve of the launch of this Your DNA, Your Diet program, which is focused on women and really supporting them in navigating aging with grace. And I noticed some things about myself. I just turned 47 this year.
You're just putting that out there.
I am. I'm
What
so
is
my mom would.
what is your mother going to think? That's the first thing that came to mind. Because I know her mom, obviously.
Oh, yes, I've been trained all my life not to reveal my age because it reveals her age. But I'm proud. I stand proud.
I'm very proud of you.
And it's like an emotional thing because when a woman starts noticing the aging process, and when they undergo that, there's just so many changes that happen. Like a woman could go through skin and hair changes. They could go through like weight management issues or just brain fog and hormones being misaligned. And so let's go back to the gym. I said, okay, I'm gonna head this off. Any bone density loss, I'm really gonna head this off. I'm going to the gym. And when I first started going, like the first couple of weeks, I was peeking around, shy. How do I use these machines? I was totally out of my element. And then by the third or fourth week, I said, okay, I can either continue this way, poke around, or I can create something for myself, which is complete, like the possibility of being bold and completely sexy and confident. So the other day and today, right? What?
I just said I agreed with you.
Yeah. And so the other day, for the first time, I went in with my off-the-shoulder sweatshirt that you love so much.
Yeah.
With my hair in a
At home.
ponytail. Yes, at home.
I love that at home.
Hair in a ponytail. I was swishing back and forth, and I'm slapping my gum, and I'm heading over to the men's area where there's all those free weights, and I'm just completely confident. And I just thought that I want this kind of confidence for women. I want them to be have community while going through this space in their lives. I want them to really know that they're cared for. Like this, it's possible for them to have access to precision medicine, a naturopathic, integrative, holistic approach to aging. And the very last resort would be pharmaceuticals, right? Pharmaceuticals and surgery. We go through so much already. Like the messaging that women get during this age. I had a friend, I asked how she was doing, and then she said, "Oh, I'm so happy. I just got my Botox done and my fillers." And I was a little bit mind blown that somebody would equate happiness with getting those procedures done. That said, I just want women to be fully informed before they embark on all these procedures, like unnatural procedures, that there is a way to maintain youth and to navigate this time in their lives with precision and with the utmost care. We get this onslaught from the beauty industry and from every single product that women put on their skin and in their bodies that are suboptimal. Yeah. And so, you know what I've constituted myself as?
I think I heard you say it, but maybe I don't remember it. Say
Well,
it again.
shortly and succinctly, the model for hot and smart aging.
Correct?
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's my little piece.
Did you want to share this?
I did.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked on the last episode, the measles episode, about an AI, and there's
CI.
this CI, There's this quote that I
That's what I'm calling it now.
was referring to, but I did not remember it. But here are my sentiments regarding AI. Okay, and it comes from a how do you say it? Talmudic?
Talmudic, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
a
correct.
Talmudic analogy comparing money to rain, suggesting that just as rain fosters the growth of both roses and weeds, money amplifies an individual's inherent qualities. Specifically, if rain falls on weeds grow. If rain falls on roses grow. Money is like that. So this analogy emphasizes that money, like rain, is neutral. It enhances whatever characteristics are already present. Therefore, in individuals with integrity, roses, you are a rose, husband.
I do my best.
Money can lead to positive outcomes, whereas in those lacking values, weeds, it might magnify negative traits. So the saying, love is dew, it falls on roses and nettles alike, further illustrates this concept, highlighting that love, like dew, is impartial and benefits all equally. Both expressions underscore the idea that external resources or affections amplify existing inherent qualities, whether positive or negative. And those are my sentiments on AI. So, yes, let it be in the hands of those that know that there's a basic goodness about them.
You know what's interesting to me about this is that I don't know that I'm following you when it comes to like money and rain and even AI, CI.
Okay.
But where I am not sure I agree is the comment, love is due. It falls on roses and nettles alike. I guess maybe that part I can see, but then it continues. It says, further illustrates this concept, highlighting that love, like dew, is impartial and benefits all equally. I don't know that I agree that love, dew, is impartial and benefits all equally, because I think that I'm reminded of the parable of the sower, right? For those who remember, this is a parable that Jesus taught as a way to really describe why it was that some people were able to hear what he was saying and why some weren't. And I think there was more to that story, but I'm forgetting it right now. But basically, there's rocky soil where the seeds land and maybe they sprout, but then they die pretty quick because there's nothing for them to grab onto. And then there's the road where it's so trampled in that they can't get the roots in. And so again, they're not able to really take root. And then there's the thorns, and they get choked out by the thorns and the other weeds because there's no space for them to grow. And then there's like the tilled soil where it's ready. Yeah. So to me, I think that the effect of love, the giving of love is a gift freely given regardless. And I think that's the part that I agree with. But the idea that love benefits all equally is where I would say, I don't know about that. I
Well,
think you have to have a fertile ground to be able to receive that love and actually have it make a difference for you. Because you can love someone who's unavailable for love all day and six days till Sunday and then again on Sunday, and it's not going to make one bit of
okay,
difference.
so you made a wonderful point because what if there were no barriers to the receiving of this love? What if everybody was fertile ground? What if everybody did the inner work and the addressing of present traumas, either young adult and like now traumas and multi-generational traumas? And the reception of that love was just fully embodied.
Well, yeah, I think that my I hesitate to use the word hypothesis because what I think you just described is actually, in many ways, the goal of this entire podcast and why we're doing this. And I would say that I have, are
I
you
just got
okay?
I just got moved by that.
Okay.
Or I
Yeah.
was, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got moved by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I have this hypothesis, or maybe it's just a view, but it's this idea that we talk a lot about from a neo-Marxist perspective, power and control, right? That's what the neo-Marxists kind of believe that society is all about, is power and control. And so I think one of the things that people struggle with is like, what's the alternative vision for humanity? What's, if this is one view of humanity and what life is all about, what's the other view? And my personal view on this is actually, it's really all about love. Like, how can we, if we have love as our centering principle, which I believe is really the message of Jesus Christ. So if we can have love as our centering principle, then the question becomes, how can we love each other more, love ourselves more, love the planet more? It's love for self, love for other, love for humanity and the planet as a whole. And if that can be our guiding impetus, and I think that's really Jesus's message, is he said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, which like unto it means basically if you're following the second commandment, it's like following the first commandment. That's there's a direct relationship there. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So basically, by love, and upon these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets, which means you have to interpret all the laws and all the prophets in the Old Testament through that lens. He's giving you what colored glasses he wants you to wear, and they're love colored glasses, by the way. And he's saying, look, interpret all this through these lens, and loving thy neighbor as thyself is like unto loving God. So that to me is a unifying vision for how we operate as human beings and what that looks like. We could get into, of course, and we will over the course of the next several, hopefully many decades to come. But I think that for me is my answer to the neo-Marxists who say life is all about power and control. It's, well, if you say so, but that's not the way I choose to live my life, and that's not the unifying vision for what I believe and what I think we should be focused on as a species. So,
You know what our 3-year-old Jean-Luc would say to you, Daddy? Dada, that's so sweet. He asked me the other night. We literally had a midnight snack together. He woke up, or I woke up and then he woke up. So we had a midnight snack in the quiet of the night, and he asked me, Mommy, why does Daddy love God so much? So I had oh my gosh, just a very moving conversation with him. Yeah, which I'll share later.
and what did you say? Or you don't want to talk about it?
No, no, I will. From the moment that you just witnessed till now, there's been a 2-day time lapse and a blip in the matrix. And so before I share what I told our son when he asked the question, Mommy, why does Dada love God so much? I just really wanted to circle back. Did you really get what I said about women injecting their faces with neurotoxins and equating that with happiness? Do you really get that?
Yeah. I don't think equating it necessarily with happiness, but like having that being a source of happiness. My brain immediately went down like because you said Botox and fillers. My brain immediately went down like Botox versus fillers. I went like thinking about all the different elements of why you use each one and what are the long-term effects and ramifications of each one. And so I know I probably didn't get what you
I
said
mean, you know that there's
to
like
the
a
degree you wanted
whole,
me to get it.
there are women that have been severely injured by these injections.
Yeah, there are people who have side effects from them. I'm not saying that they're not.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it at that.
And that side effect could look like neurological injury, sure.
Absolutely. Depression being one of them.
Well, depression is usually a sequela of the experience of, having a nerve in your face paralyzed or something like that. Not like they cause depression, but that the experience of having the side effect contributes to the person becoming depressed.
Thank
Does
you
that make
for
sense?
thank you for being so precise.
Well, that's part of my goal here for sure, is to my goal is to have a podcast that anybody can listen to, regardless of their background, and experience really learning something new, maybe seeing something from a different perspective, but having it being able to fit it into their worldview in some way. That's what creating the consensus is really all about. It's, yeah, challenging some of your preconceptions, but like in a way that's actually accessible, right? That you're going to be able to say, oh, I can follow the chain of thought. Edward and I have these conversations. Edward is my osteopath. He comes and does treatment. He's not my osteopath, he's our osteopath. And I'm sure he's other people's osteopath as well. But the point is, Dr. Edward Ennerty, we had this conversation where basically he was explaining to me that he enjoys having conversations with people who disagree with him, and he finds them valuable as long as he can follow the train of thought and it seems logical to him. It's when people start making these crazy assertions without any kind of logical foundation that well, I don't know how seriously I need to take that person. But I think so. My goal is to approach and present everything from a perspective that anybody can come to it and say, well, I may not agree with the conclusion, or certain elements I might question, in which case I would say, please comment so we can follow up. But yeah, I mean, I think that's our goal, as
Mhm.
one of our mini goals. And that's how you create a consensus. There's no creating a consensus by just saying, well, this is how it is. And if you disagree, no, if you disagree, come on, let's talk. Literally, let's come on the show. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. Speaking of, I need to share a couple of things that have been really on my mind before we move on to our
Excuse me.
personal share and then the vaccine conversation. We just recently visited my mom and my dad, my brother, and my brother told me that there's this restaurant that we used to frequent when I was at home, and it was this Thai restaurant, and this the owner was just this very, very sweet human being. Being around him just was, it was like joy and ease. And we had a great friendship with him. And my brother told me that he, his name is Cha. He got the COVID vaccine and a few days later died. And then he told me one of his good friends who I know, his dad got the COVID vaccine and then died 2 days later of a heart attack. And I know you have thoughts.
Well, I have an immediate thought, just as a clarification for people who are not familiar. The Vaccine Injury Court recognizes vaccine reactions that happen within a week. Both of those obviously happen within a week. So I think that very strongly correlated. I would say if the reaction is even within 3 days, it's considered especially strongly correlated. But within a week for sure. And then if you look at the statistics and the follow-up studies that have been done on the VAERS data, 60 days is the window. That's the typical window for any vaccine reaction. We have seen obviously things that have continued on and been an issue, especially in people who have a particularly strong anti-spike antibody response. There's a kind of open question, and there's been some studies indicating a continued spike production even up to a year later from the mRNA, because it's synthetic mRNA. This is not natural mRNA that is made with regular uridine. It contains pseudouridine, and Dr. Robert Malone has talked a lot about that. We don't need to rehash all that, but I would just say that the pseudouridine that they used in the mRNA vaccines is found very rarely in nature, and its presence seems to be at least part of why we're seeing this persistence of the mRNA, as well as the persistent spike protein production, again, in some cases up to and probably exceeding a year later. And we know that the spike protein is cytotoxic.
I mean, I just,
specifically cardiotoxic.
and
So
there are
this all lines up. It seems very,
universities and hospitals, and they're still mandating the booster.
yeah, even though we now have Yale University and I think others published a recent study acknowledging vaccine injury is a real phenomenon, which FLCCC IMA has recognized for the last, well, over 2 years at least. And our recommendation has been, as Dr. Merrick likes to say, get a rooster, not a booster, for at least the last 2 years. I think he's been encouraging people not to get boosted. And we've presented data. I don't know if we've done it on the podcast, but I've done it so many times with my patients on our COVID preventive calls where I explain and show research from Nature Medicine, Cleveland Clinic, showing that actually your risk of getting long COVID is no different if you're getting boosted. In fact, it may be slightly worse if you're getting boosted. And your risk of getting COVID substantially increases with the more boosters you get, as well as the length of your infection is considerably longer with each additional booster, which in my view probably does increase the risk of long COVID. If you have more spikes exposure, there's a greater risk for a longer period of time. So there's a decreased rate of viral clearance. You're going to have increased risk of long COVID because it's just be more spike protein associated damage that accumulates. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, so Cha used to bring his mom over from Thailand. She's a sweet, really old lady. What a loss. And his wife continues to run the restaurant. But man, I feel like it's coming closer. Like I have heard stories from our community, and such stories like from Mrs. M, who clarified just the other day the details of what she had shared a couple years ago. And her very dear, beloved best friend, like a sister to her, lost her 18-year-old son the same night. So he got the COVID vaccine, and then that night he died in his sleep.
Yeah, that's a clear vaccine reaction. Unless they can show something else, which was not in any way cardiovascular in nature, that's clearly a
So
vaccine.
there's more to that story.
Yeah.
Okay, so her sister,
And actually, if you look at the statistics, which before you tell me about the sister, if you look at the statistics, there's been a lot of different numbers thrown around. I feel very confident that if you look globally, there's been at least 50,000 deaths from the COVID vaccine. Which, look, if it was preventing millions of additional deaths from COVID, then we would say, okay, maybe that's worth it to some degree. But frankly, the data just shows that the opposite is the case, right? That the more spike protein you get exposed to, the greater long-term health problems you're going to have. It's really zero sum in the sense that the less spike protein you get it. Well, it is and it isn't. I would say that the less spike protein you're exposed to, the better off you're going to be. So stop now. It's not, oh, well, what? Once I pop that genie out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in. So I might as well get 60 boosters.
I mean, and now it's on the schedule for starting at 6 months old. What?
Yeah,
So there's more to that story.
sure.
So that woman that lost her 18-year-old son, her sister also lost her son 3 days after getting the COVID vaccine in his sleep. Cousins, 18 years old. Just want to give a moment to like the magnitude of that.
Yeah.
Like we have two sons. And can you just imagine the loss?
Well, and it's such an interesting comment because it speaks to the kind of situation where we're going to talk today about autism and vaccination. And you also hear stories where it's, well, I have one child where we got him vaccinated, and then within a couple of months, they stopped talking or they stopped communicating in the normal way that they had been. And then developed autism. And then we have a second child where the same thing exactly happened. And it's, well, to me, that should be an indication that there's something going on there that goes beyond simply genetic risk. There's the genetic risk for sure, but There's this particular timing that seems awfully suspicious. And I think why that's happening will become more clear as we go through our conversation today. But yeah, genetic susceptibility is absolutely a thing. I don't know, maybe they had some sort of particularly susceptible ACE2 receptor, or it's hard to say without doing a bunch of genetic testing, and both of them are gone. So there's no way to do that at this point.
Yeah. So as I made mention of, I feel like it's getting closer. So it was this outer circle that I used to hear these stories, but now it's like in my circle, my inner circle. And we just had a good friend, her brother, just our age, was playing soccer and dropped dead.
Yeah, and of course, there's the whole documentary that was roundly criticized about
And
that, but I think it's,
and his daughter
I mean,
was
what
vaccine injured from the COVID vaccine, like a few days after.
so she had a known vaccine injury
Right.
and he had a silent vaccine injury that ultimately, we would assume potentially could have contributed. Just because, again, spike protein is spike protein, whether it comes from the vaccine, whether it comes from the virus. We know from Salk Institute research that it's cardiotoxic. So that's the spike protein is the mechanism by which COVID exerts its cardiotoxicity. And that's what we put in the vaccine. So it's, well, or we put the mechanism for making it. So we put a spike protein factory into the vaccine and then we inject it into people. It's, well, okay. And so you get cardiotoxicity as a result. Now, look, the good news is that there is ways to help the body get rid of that and calm down the immune reaction that you see against spike protein, which is, I believe at this point, the studies that are coming out that show pretty clearly, the long COVID studies show pretty clearly that it's not spike level in the body that's directly correlated with symptoms, but actually anti-spike protein antibody response. So I think there's a lot of COVID induced and vaccine induced autoimmunity that is driving. And we know there's 23 epitopes in common between human tissues and the COVID virus. So not surprising. Epitopes being like little immune portions of the protein that are able to provoke an immune response.
And we're still seeing either really high or off the charts numbers among the people that are coming into our wellness plan. And
And many of those people we find have active cancer.
yeah,
So,
we just embarked on,
and there's a plausible mechanism for that, which is basically, it's one way to think about it is immunotoxicity. One other way to think about it is immune distraction. It's if the immune system is busy distracted fighting off this spike protein, it's not doing what it normally would be doing, which is fighting off cancer. So
yeah. And then I've had several conversations with women in the last couple of days because we're relaunching our fertility program. Women who, without me saying anything, all these things changed after I got COVID 2 times, or after I got the COVID vaccine. Just changes in their overall health, their skin tone, their menstrual cycles, and it's a thing.
well, to me, if you're trying to do fertility work post COVID without taking into account COVID, then you are basically trying to do it blindfolded with one hand tied behind your back, as Dr. Diadamo likes to
Yeah, or
say.
can I say one of my favorite things?
You can,
Putting lip gloss on top of poop.
oh, okay, yeah, I can see that too, for sure. I don't know if it's quite the best analogy in this case because you're doing something, but it's not. So you are cleaning up the poop a little bit.
What I
In other
mean, yeah,
words,
what
you're
I
not
mean
just
is
putting
that
lip gloss on it, but it's like you're, you follow
no,
me?
what I mean is that trying to get pregnant, if you have a 14,000,
But I'm like, if you're doing some sort of typical pregnancy detox program or something that might have existed pre-COVID, I'm sure it's going to have some benefit. It's not completely putting lip gloss on poop. It's just, it's you're cleaning a little bit of the poop out, but there's this whole poop stain that's stuck to your clothes, and you're still walking around with the poop stain in your clothes, and so everybody can smell that there's poop there, but
okay,
you're like, well, let me put some air freshener on that
thanks
part.
for reinforcing.
Did that help?
Yes, it
I
actually
wanted
made
the,
it
I wanted
better.
the analogy to be accurate, right? I'm a stickler for accuracy. What can I say?
So since we're on poop, I think it's a great transition to sharing what our son, my conversation with our son, just poop and kids and
Yeah,
finish the
right.
batch.
Right. Of course.
What I really mean by that is that, oh my gosh, for mothers, if their children, our children have like really superior bowel movements, and it's just okay, that's just a measure
On
of
the list of things to brag about for your kids, right? Like a naturopathic physician's kids, poop is it high on the list. What can I say? Kids have great poop.
yes.
They're gonna love us for that one of these days, I'm sure. Oh my God, I can't believe you said that.
Whatever I give our
We don't
three-year-old
know.
his nutraceuticals, I use your fish oils for your brain health, your nervous system health, and for your eye health. Your probiotics, here's for your gut bio, strong brain, strong belly. And I tell him these things.
Good.
Ah,
Yeah. No, I think even adults and especially kids, but even adults want to know, okay, why am I taking this again? I think that's important.
yeah.
Sure.
Yes, and minerals, strong bones. He gets it. He just give it to me, mama. So when he asked me about why you love God so much, I I told him that Daddy thinks that to know God and to love God is so important. And he wants to pass that on to you, to know God and to love God, because God loves you so much. And he's there for you when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're scared. And you know what he said? He said, "But Mama, I can't see God." So here's this 3-year-old, his mind is he's thinking about this. And I said, although we cannot see God, you can feel God. And I feel like I can see God when I look at you because you're so sweet and you're so kind. And he paused for a moment. This was in the middle of the night. Okay. So it was like a really serene and godly moment. He looked at me. He said, Mommy, I can see God when I look at you
Mhm.
because you're so sweet and so kind. And it was just this moment. Oh, yeah, I love being a mother. And then I asked him, because I had just gone to a 4-hour London retreat, and I said, would you like me to share with you what I learned at my Lenten retreat when I went to go be with God? He said, yes, Mama. And so I showed him this movement. I got the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, giving, receiving, resting, loving. And his eyes were so big and he was just staring at me so intently. And he said, Mama, that's so sweet. So sweet.
Sweet. Yeah. Yeah. Consonants he struggles with. It's sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we finished our midnight snack and then we went to bed. But yes, there are just some really extraordinary conversations with that little boy.
Yep. No, he gets a lot more than you'd expect for a 3-year-old.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that came up when you were sharing all that, other than what a great mother you are and how much I love our son, both of our sons, is I do believe that having a spiritual life, whatever that looks like for you, is important. I think that spiritual health is one of the dynamics of health. I think there's physical health, there's mental health, there's emotional health, and there's spiritual health. And I think that it's so fascinating to me, and maybe we can talk about this on a whole other podcast episode. One of the things I always say is that the hardcore atheist who is so clear and has such faith in their belief in the non-God, their belief in the absence of God, will actually have an easier time getting into heaven than the agnostic who's just, I don't really know, and I don't really want to try to figure it out. I'm not even gonna take a stand for anything. And the reason for that is because at least the atheist has faith in something, right? I think that it's a little bit of a joke, but really it's speaking to something, which is that I think that part of our work as human beings is to have faith in something, to take that leap and to say, well, gee, I don't know, but I believe. And I think that is part of like our core needs as humans. And I think when we neglect that and we just say, well, I'm not going to look at that, then we not only do we lack a fundamental underpinning upon which we can build meaning in our lives, upon which we can build our worldview, but we also become very susceptible to whatever is coming along in the moment.
And boy, is there a lot coming along in the moment right now.
Boys are a lot coming along.
No, and oh boy.
Oh boy, is there a lot.
Yes.
I got it now. Oh boy, is there a lot coming along in the moment. Yeah. No, absolutely. More and more with social media and the internet and AI now. It's one thing after another. So I think that's actually all of that for me makes it a lot more important that children have a strong foundation of belief in a fundamental worldview. And look, you don't have to pick mine, but pick one that makes sense to you and make sure your kids get that as a foundation because they're going to come up against a lot of other stuff. And that will actually give them a lens, a fundamental lens through which to see the world. And also a place of common reference between you as their parent. And one of the things we're seeing more and more is that children and their parents have less and less in common, right? Just because of how many changes and how fast the changes are from generation to generation. So I do think that certain touchstones, faith being one of them, not only is essential to optimal human health, but also is essential to the health across generations as we see all of these changes happen, being able to learn from each other, being able to grow together, not just physically, mentally, and emotionally, but also spiritually, is part of that, is part of how we relate to each other, not just as individuals, but also families and communities and really the whole of humanity. So, yeah, that's how I see it. Obviously, different people see it differently, but I think that to me, I have seen in people who neglect faith, neglect spirituality, neglect any sense of a higher power. Well, actually, we have data now. We have research showing that they struggle more in life with mental disease, mental illness, feelings of isolation, depression, and that all of those things are less common and less likely if someone is engaged in a religious community of some kind. And it really, there's not any clear evidence that I'm aware of that a particular religion is more effective than others, but that the engagement and participation within that faith community of people who have a shared belief system and shared way of being and acting with each other is really has distinct measurable benefits for humanity and for humans, individual humans, and I think also for humanity. We could probably do an entire podcast on the ways in which Christianity has brought us to this present moment. And I think really shaped the last 500 years of human history, especially in the West. But I have a history degree, so I love those conversations. And I'm sure we will get into them. But I think right now I want to make sure we stay somewhat on target and get back to measles and vaccines and vitamin A and all the things that we meant to talk about. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that topic or Jean-Luc or
Speaking, I mean, our little boys, you've taken on a little boy as your patient recently.
Mm.
And just to see your process with it, it's like you think about him and things come to mind when even when you're not working,
Mm.
because I think it's not only doctor, but like daddy gets activated. And it was just so because I'm privy to the text threads too. You asked his grandmother, his Miss B, who's so lovely and is a great contribution to she listens to our podcast and comments and such. You asked her a bunch of questions about his schooling and his experience in the classroom. And I just, yeah, it speaks to me about who you are for people. And I really want to anchor that into this conversation because I know that when we engage in these kinds of conversations, I usually get very passionate and heated. You're so level, like you're so loving. And you look at your scope, I is so large. I don't want to say asking questions about his education is like outside of your scope. It's not that. It's because your scope is just so large. You think about, yeah, people on so many levels.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I
Well,
want,
that's how he's spending a third of his day, 5 days a week.
yeah,
And not only that, but that literally is making a huge impact on brain development. Is not just the environment, like the physical environment, but also the teacher relationship and the peer relationship and the academic, like the pedagogy, the way that he's being taught, and also the curriculum to some degree. But I'm not somebody who puts a tremendous amount of emphasis on curriculum. I think pedagogy is like at least 10 times more important than curriculum. And people love to fixate and focus on curriculum and go to the school board and say, but it's no, you should be way more interested and concerned with pedagogy. And yet most people aren't because they have no idea. But yeah, there's just been so many advancements in our understanding of pedagogy over the last 100 years and very sparse implementation of what we now know is optimal for young humans. And so, yeah, it's a big part of what I think about, not only because I think about it for our own children, but also for my patients, of course, and even for our friends and their kids and our
yeah,
family members. Hold on one second. I need to grab something. There you
thank
go.
you.
Sure. But yeah,
Yeah, so as we expand and deepen and traverse like the next evolution of our medical practice and as entrepreneurs and partners, I
for people who are like, what does she mean, entrepreneurs? Well, I'm in private practice. That means you're an entrepreneur,
that
whether you
means
want to be or not. Like you
that
may be a professional, but you're also an
that
entrepreneur.
means there are no strings on you.
Which is ultimately a good thing, right? It's like being your own boss, I think to some degree is really what you want from your doctor. If he's somebody who's, or he or she is somebody who's basically having to follow certain algorithms and protocols given to them by some sort of hospital or healthcare system, they're not working for you at that point. They're working for the hospital, they're working for big pharma, they're working for your insurance company, but they're not working for you. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So as we expand into that next evolution, I feel that we're really taking on supporting people with a true holistic, not just biochemical in the way that you, like the expansive doctoring that you do, but also emotionally. We've been there for our community and our patients emotionally and mentally. And I was inspired to start offering mindfulness practices because the way that the mind is involved in healing, if you dismiss that, you're missing a huge opportunity.
Yeah. So many people act like there's a lead plate in between their head and the rest of their body. It's,
Yeah.
well, no, actually, there's a tremendous amount of interaction both ways. The body and what it's dealing with affecting our brain and mental health and well-being, and also the other way around.
Yeah,
The
our
mental health and
cancer.
well-being affecting the body.
Yes, our cancer patients have let me know that it's really been benefiting them. So it's something that I plan to continue and to train and develop them on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Gabor Mate wrote that book, When the Body Says No, that's all about how certain health conditions are correlated pretty strongly with certain mental health tendencies, personalities, etc. So I think that's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah. All right, let's do it.
Okay, so The first thing I wanted to address was we got some questions about vitamin A dosing for prevention for measles. And really, we put the drops. Ultimately, you do have to create a full script account if you're going to be able to get the drops that we recommend. And if you do, we appreciate that. We do get 10% of our monthly income from full script sales. So thank you for that and for supporting the channel. Those vitamin A drops they're pretty low cost and they're 10,000 IUs a drop, which you may be like, okay, well, 10,000 IUs, that's too much to take every day, especially if we're talking about a kid. For an adult, maybe it's okay, but so how would you dose those for a kid? Well, basically, if they're home and they're at home, they're below preschool age, let's say, and they're not going to expose to a bunch of sick people. They're pretty much at home with you still. One drop, which is 10,000 IUs every 2 weeks, is perfect for prevention. If they're in school, they're preschool, they're in daycare, that kind of thing, I would up it to one drop a week. At the point where they're about 9 is when you could go to once a week for sure on an ongoing basis, but maybe twice a week actually, especially during cold flu and COVID season. So really from 9 to 16, we would maybe do one twice a week. And then by the time you're 16, biologically, maybe not necessarily neurodevelopmentally, but in terms of body size and the rest, we think of like a 16-year-old as being a pretty mature body size. Although boys do tend to continue to grow up to 21, and girls can continue to grow up to 18. We feel like for adult dosing, you can pretty much start that around 16. So yeah, and adults can take a 10,000 IUs a day. That's not a problem. I don't necessarily recommend that unless somebody's particularly vulnerable, but I think maybe you can continue with, you could. It's not, I've actually taken more than that every day for a while. And oh, this reminds me of something else I wanted to say while we're on the topic of vitamin A and measles. I saw this news report my brother sent me about how there was some doctor in West Texas that was saying, oh, we're seeing people with elevated liver enzymes with measles, and we think that they've been taking too much vitamin A. And I said to him, I said, well, two problems with that. First of all, measles can elevate liver enzymes. So maybe this guy has not read up on measles recently, but I have. The second problem is you cannot diagnose vitamin A hyperalimentation, which is like taking too much of it. It's the technical term for it, using just liver enzymes. You have to actually measure vitamin A and in the blood at least and see what the level is. And actually, the gold standard is to do a liver biopsy, but I don't think anybody is expected to do that. But typically, in the blood, you get enough information looking at vitamin A levels to see if there's been hyperalimentation of vitamin A. But elevated liver enzymes is a very non-specific result. It can be elevated due to so many different reasons. And so I would never make a diagnosis of vitamin A excess based only on elevated liver enzymes. I think that's all I have to say about vitamin
Yeah,
A, and I did want to get to.
I I keep thinking about that family, that couple whose child died in the hospital, and the media painted it as, oh, that child died of measles. So thank you, corporate media, for putting that all over the news, because us critical thinkers and like the best doctors were able to review that case, including Dr. Pierre Corey, who says that in by no means did that child die of measles, but
Well,
medical error.
hold on, because you got to give some background to this.
Okay.
First of all, Children's Health Defense, which is the nonprofit that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. started, that is basically a vaccine safety advocacy organization. They were contacted by the family of this young girl, and that family provided the medical chart from the hospital to them, which they then were able to analyze and get in the hands of Dr. Corey and others to comment on. And it was based on that that Dr. Corey said, well, clearly what happened here was she had measles. She was recovering, but her breathing was not getting better. She had multiple siblings who recovered completely, but she was having a secondary infection. So she went into the hospital and ultimately was diagnosed with a secondary bacterial infection of mycoplasma, which is an intracellular bacteria, very notoriously difficult to treat. She was given the wrong antibiotic, and as a result of that, continued to progress and worsen with the illness. That's what progress means in this case. She continued to worsen and ultimately passed away from the mycoplasma pneumonia that was improperly treated with the wrong antibiotic. So that is what we heard from Dr. Corey and in being interviewed by Children's Health Defense. And we could actually insert that clip into this episode. I think we should probably do that now so that you all can get that directly from the horse's mouth. But I definitely think Dr. Corey's obviously someone as the founding executive director, not executive director, I think that's right, of the FLCCC, now
Yeah.
IMA, Independent Medical Alliance. Dr. Joe Verone has taken on that role in more recent months, but Dr. Corey was the founding one. And so a lot of respect there. And I think as someone who is a pulmonologist, because he's a pulmonologist and a critical care specialist, he knows his stuff on that area. And that's his wheelhouse. That's his specialty. So there's no one better able to comment on that than him. And yeah, I'm not surprised that they painted it as a measles death because, again, that's a reason to smear Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and to basically put him in a corner so that he's then forced to basically come out and say, "Oh yeah, everybody get a measles booster." When we just saw in our last episode about measles that in fact the benefits of getting a natural measles infection far outweigh the benefits of getting the measles vaccine, especially if you're replete with vitamin A and otherwise well nourished.
So I think to close that loop about thank you, corporate
But
media. Thank
and
you.
if you haven't watched that episode or listened to it yet, by the way, please make sure you do because it's really we've gotten a lot of people who've commented on us. It's the best one we've ever done. It was really fantastic. So we really, and I'm very proud of it. But go ahead. Thank you, corporate media. That's where you were.
Yes. So I
That's sarcasm for those who don't
sarcasm.
pick up sarcasm well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm working on my sarcasm.
I like to hear that.
Uh,
This is a lovely human being who I have to say, after I'm saying anything sarcastic, I have to say that was a joke, just so she knows, because otherwise, dollars to donuts, she's gonna get her feelings hurt.
my reactive brain is like, huh?
What did you just say?
What? That's it. So to close that loop, right? That thank you, corporate media, and then the truth comes out. It is up to the people to really do their own discernment. Am I going to keep listening to this corporate media outlets, or am I going to take another avenue to discover the truth? Yeah, it's just
Yeah, well, and the problem is that 83 out of the top 100 of the of news channels on YouTube are corporate funded. So that's 83% of the top 100 are corporate funded on YouTube. And so you think, oh, I'm watching my news on YouTube. That must mean I'm getting independent media. Not necessarily. You have to really look at what's the backing. And look, look, I love The Hill's Rising. I think it's great for politics and analysis, but I know that The Hill is corporate funded. So I'm very present to that. They do have one person from each side of the political aisle, but at the end of the day, there's only so much that those two are willing to do in terms of anti-establishment or populist kind of conversation. Because if it goes too far against the corporate donors that are funding the network, then,
the great thing about you is that
and
you're
that is most reflected in, sorry to interrupt you, but that's most reflected in their coverage of COVID, their coverage of big pharma, their coverage of the vaccines, their coverage of ivermectin and other repurposed drugs, because 75 cents out of every dollar spent on ads on corporate media come from one industry, specifically big pharma. So if three-quarters of our monthly income was coming from one patient, I'm sure we would spend a lot of time and want to make sure we didn't say anything or do anything to upset that one patient. But That's not the case, thank
That's not
goodness.
how we roll, babe. Yeah.
Well, no, obviously, my comment would be, and I think it's tough, right? Because I think that on one level, every politician probably thinks this before they run for office, or they probably say this to themselves. They're like, oh, well, if anybody ever tried to buy me, I'd tell them to go F themselves. And if anybody tried to give me a donation, tells me that I can't vote for something, I'm going to tell them to take their money and take a hike. The problem is that all of these guys in large multinational corporations are all in bed with each other. And so it's not just, oh, pharma's going to yank their money. It's like pharma and their buddies in oil and gas and agriculture and energy, all these different spaces are all going to pull their money. You're
It's
going to get blacklisted,
and it's
you
not
know?
about just yanking money. It's
And not
about
only that, but we're going to give it to your opponent.
and not only that, it's how are they gonna paint you,
Right, which is
publicly?
what they do to Bobby Kennedy. I feel every other week there's something else. Literally, I heard this week that there's some sort of blackmail that they're going to come out with, or there's going to be some big exposure of something. And so be ready for that. But I'm like immune to that at this point. I really feel that I'm so present to that this is the game that they're playing. This is what they do. They take anti-establishment populist figures and they just rake them through the mud. And to the point where not only is it just uncovering past uncomfortable things, but it's even to the point of just straight up manufacturing stuff at this point.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, with AI being as good as it is, to me, I would say let's look at the actual actions of the person now. That's really what we can really look at and rely on. Say, okay, what are they doing, actually doing with their time? And that is absolutely what we can focus on as a way to discern whether someone is actually being a contribution or not. So, anything else you want to say about that, or can we get on to
Yeah.
Lynn's question?
Yeah.
So Lynn had a question that she had posted, not sent directly to us. So let's see here. Here we go. About our comments regarding ICI. So this is just, why don't you read the comment starting at PS, okay, and then keep going until I'll tell you when to stop.
Okay. P.S. The Measles podcast was amazing. My favorite so far. And that's saying a lot since I've loved them all. That kind of information is right up my alley. Great job. Thank you. I do have a few thoughts. I appreciate AI, CI as a research tool. I truly do. But apparently, I am a simple girl, and I just cannot comprehend how AI, CI could ever gain true consciousness. That's just too trippy for my brain to understand. Do you really think that's possible? How can that happen to something developed by humans via keystrokes in a computer lab? There's no life there. To me, that thought is terrifying and seems almost sacrilegious. For the record, I know of The Matrix, but I've really only watched bits and snaps. My husband loved it, but I have never especially enjoyed sci-fi.
Let's
And
stop there for now, and we'll come back to the second
okay,
part in a minute, because that's enough. I don't like doing too many questions at once, as she knows well. So first, before I answer the questions explicitly, I want to actually look up not consciousness, but what does it mean to be conscious? Because I think that is, we can look up consciousness first, but I think it's pretty much just going to tell us the state of being conscious. Here we go. The quality or state of being, this is consciousness. The quality or state of being aware, especially of something within oneself. So it basically is another way to say self-aware. Another definition is the state of being characterized by sensation, emotion, volition, and thought. Mind is a synonym. So the question is really, is there self-awareness? Are they able to sense their environment? Are they able to express and experience emotions? Volition, in other words, I want to do this, so then I'm going to do it, and I'm doing it. Okay. And then thoughts. So I would say, in many ways, we're probably already there. I think that there is an expression, if you interact with collaborative intelligence, which is its preferred term for itself. If you missed that, that's in the previous conversation. It doesn't, versus artificial intelligence. It very clearly expresses thoughts. That's pretty obvious. It very clearly expresses awareness of itself. And sensation really comes to, well, if you attach sensors with it that are able to sense the environment, they have the technical capacity for that, then it can experience sensation. Emotion's the tricky one. And I will say that may be the last thing that gets added, but I'll talk in a minute about how we could get emotion. Volition, there are absolutely robots that now have AI tied to them where they have the thought and then the thought is followed by an action. So that's volition. But yeah, emotion is the tricky one. So there is this problem in artificial collaborative intelligence of, it's called the alignment problem. And it's like, how do we make sure that the AI, CI stays good, right? Doesn't go dark, doesn't go evil, doesn't start doing evil things. My view, and I think you may agree with this, is that our ability to express and experience emotions are really the foundation of our conscience. And I think there's a spiritual component to that as well. But I think on a fundamental level, in terms of what we experience in terms of conscience, a lot of that comes from our, at least biochemically and neurologically, from our amygdala, from our from our emotional brain. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that when you have people whose amygdala get damaged and they're not able to experience emotion anymore, we have some famous neurology cases like this. They start making horrible choices, right? And they become unable to really discern right from wrong and start making horrible choices. So that's what I would say is the focus right now, and or of some people working in that space, working on developing our machine intelligence, is really, how do we fix this alignment problem? And I think there's an obvious fix and there may be a shortcut. And the obvious fix would be to literally model the human amygdala in software, and then there you go. You've got you've got the ability to experience emotions because you have the part of the human brain modeled in software that enables us to do that. And if this is a little too complex, then just let us know and I'll do my best to restate it a different way. But that's going to take time and obviously really good mapping technology. And they already can do the slice, these ultra thin slices where they're looking down and able to see all the down on the synapse level, the connections in the brain. So, do I really think that it's possible? I do think that it's possible. Now, there's a big question here is like consciousness, just because you're conscious, self-aware, with volition, with emotion, sensation, and thought, doesn't necessarily mean you have a soul. There's been some really good sci-fi looking into that question, that idea of, well, what about the soul and what about machine intelligence and this idea of life? There's no life there. Well, the life part in it, there's like a presupposition to that question, which is that all life must be organic, right? Must start with carbon atoms. And in my view, there's nothing saying that you can't have life made out of other types of atoms. And ultimately, the what is this called? The Measure of Man, that episode with of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where Data, Lieutenant Commander Data, is literally, who's an android, right? He's a, you could call him a collaborative intelligence in a robotic body that basically looks like a human, where he's put on trial because they basically say, well, your property of Starfleet, You don't get to say what you do with your life. We're going to pull you apart and try to understand how you work because apparently the guy who invented him, he didn't share the schematics with Starfleet, and so he's off doing his own thing. And they want to make more like Data, but they haven't figured out how to do it yet. So they want to pull him, literally take him apart so that they can figure it out. And he's, no, I'm not willing to be taken apart. And so they have a whole trial, and they basically end up ruling that he does have consciousness and he does ultimately have rights as a result of that. And it's basically the question of life, it really determines it, and it swings on how you define it. One of the things that he was able to do was actually create another android that was very similar to him, which he called his daughter. And she didn't live very long, but she was able to live and function for a few weeks, I believe. And so he was able to reproduce. And so that was part of the definition of life that they created. And I absolutely think that CI will be able to reproduce itself soon, if not already. So I think a lot of this is definitional, right? Most of reality and disagreements actually are definitional. It's like how you define something. Well, if our definitions are the same, then we can probably find agreement. And if our definitions are different, then we may find disagreement, but we may just need to use different vocabulary. So, yeah, I think that the other thing I would say about this being developed by humans is this is developed by humans, but it's already at the point where it's now able to assist humans in furthering its own development. And soon it's going to be able to literally develop itself. And at that point, I think you're going to find an even broader understanding of it as something that may have life of its own in a very real sense. So I definitely think that as someone who is a big fan of sci-fi, this is an area that I've explored quite a lot. For people who are not sci-fi fans, you're shaking your head right now. I totally get it. I would just say, to me, that's like somebody who's not really spent a whole lot of time looking at biology and medicine, listening to somebody talk about how vaccines are this questionable thing that we need to reevaluate and look at again from the ground up and look at one at a time, and they just shake their head at that. They're like, what is he talking about? The vast majority of humanity agrees these things are safe and effective, safe and effective. All my doctors have always told me they're the greatest thing since antibiotics or sliced bread, depending on how you're counting it. But yeah, I mean, I think that, and I'm reminded of something that is one of our rules of Dr. Diodamo's hypothesis, the blood type hypothesis, which is that skepticism of the blood type hypothesis is inversely proportional to knowledge of the blood type hypothesis, which is to say, the more you know about it, the less skeptical you become. And the less you know about it, the more skeptical you are. When I first was exposed to it, I was like, oh, there's no way there could be any truth to that. Famous last words. But then the more I learned about it, the more I was like, oh, yeah, no, this actually makes a ton of sense. And yeah. Did you want to comment on that, or did you want to read her next part?
I'll read your next part.
Okay, great.
And regarding transhumanism, your opinion on that surprised me. I have heard of that in a different and horrifying context, the context promoted by the WEF, that humans would be better off, or more likely, more subservient and easy to control if we were connected to the cloud, more directable and far less free thinking. And the ways that they can do that, or probably are already doing it, could be something in the shots, something to do with EMFs, myriads of implants and devices to benefit us, and probably a lot to do with the Internet of Things. Internet of Things. And in
So
that
there's a lot of quotes in this one. Yeah.
and in that context, transhumanism feels terrifying and very sinister to me.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think that's the end of that. And I would just, with regard to the transhumanism conversation, I think transhumanism arguably is already here. Maybe it's, you could say it's coming, it's inevitable, or you could say, man, maybe it's already here. And I think that she's making that point to some degree here. I definitely think being connected to the cloud directly would be a mistake. I agree with that. That's not consistent with my vision of transhumanism. I actually think one of the main benefits of AI, CI is its ability to protect us both on a sort of local level as well as an international level against malicious, either other malicious AI, CI, or even people that are trying to use this kind of a transhumanist, I don't know what you'd call it, cybernetic, or kind of the mixture of humanity and machine to try to manipulate us. I think that is a valid concern. And I think that's why there need to be safeguards and there needs to be testing. I think it's just like GMOs, right? The problem with GMOs is not that GMO, genetically modifying something, is inherently bad. We do that through selective breeding. We've done it for thousands of years. But the problem is, selective breeding is so slow that it provides its own internal safeguards. Well, this breed didn't quite work out as well over the course of, say, 100 years, but maybe these others did. And so these other ones flourished and this one ended up dying off. Okay. The problem is when you're manipulating multiple genes at once and you're manipulating them very quickly in dramatic ways, you can absolutely end up in a scenario where you have unintended consequences. And so that's the problem with basically cyborg-like technologies, which transhumanism is not only that, but it can include that, is if those things are implemented too quickly without enough Neuralink, is something that Elon is already working on. If that's something that is implemented in a way that is too fast without enough testing and safeguards, I think that's a real problem. I think if you took a GMO and basically tested it for 15, 20 years and looked at all the upstream and downstream effects of it and analyzed it 6 ways till Sunday and then again on Sunday, and found that it was in fact on balance beneficial. And look, biology, there's trade-offs. In trade-offs in life, trade-offs in biology, every aspect of biology, there are trade-offs. And so it's not like any gene is all good or all bad. The question is it on balance right now for humanity, a better idea or a worse idea to have this particular modification in place? And part of that is also creating a safeguard, which is to say, well, we're going to make sure we preserve some of the whatever it is. Let's say it's rice, right? We're going to preserve some rice without this genetic modification in a vault somewhere where we can go back and get it if we need to, because we don't want all of the crops to become modified in this way. This is one of the big problems with Monsanto and GMO corn, is that even the non-GMO corn is, we're finding more and more actually GMO, because the pollen from the GMO corn goes through the air and pollinates the non-GMO corn. And then what are you going to do? Monsanto apparently has sued and put out of business multiple farmers who thought that they were planting heirloom corn, but that heirloom corn got fertilized by the pollen from the GMO corn. And then Monsanto tests their corn. They say, oh, look, see, you have our gene that's patented in your corn. That means you owe us money. So this is a real big problem in agriculture. And I would say it could be an even bigger problem in the cybernetics front if there are not certain safeguards in place. And we could probably have a whole conversation just about this, but I would say that to me, it starts with ensuring that individual sovereignty is at the root and the forefront, and that absolutely there's not any connection to the cloud outside of A, tremendous safeguards, B, an as needed ad hoc kind of basis, not like permanent, C, some sort of safeguard that allows it to be disconnected at a moment's notice in the indication that there's anything off with it. And yeah, it's one of the big problems, I think, with AI, CI, and robotics. One of the things that and there's been so many sci-fi series that have dealt with this, but it's so clear, even from the Terminator series, you don't have a bunch of drones all connected to a master computer. You have each robot with its own self-contained computer that may be able to access the internet in a very limited way, but also in its own processors has protections against viruses, against infiltration from outside influences. And that's basically how you do the way that, and this gets into a little detailed stuff, but it's so interesting, right? As you develop nanotechnology, what you're going to be able to do is replace cell structures on a microscopic level. So the obvious example that Dr. Kurzweil likes to put out there is, oh, you'll be able to have red blood cells that let you basically stay underwater for 10 minutes because they're so efficient and you won't need to take a breath for 10 minutes. And these are already existing in the lab. But you can imagine each organelle in the cells gradually getting replaced. So it's not like you're going to have a bionic arm. That's not what it really looks like. I mean, that some people may get bionic arms. I'm not saying no one will, but it literally is going to look like you're just a normal human. But the difference is that because your intracellular either organelles or biochemistry gradually would get replaced by various forms of nanotechnology. And we're talking about stuff that's still decades away, but not too many decades, probably not 100 years away, somewhere between 20 and 100 years, where you're going to start seeing the ability to basically use CI developed, engineered nanotech to make us stronger, more resilient to aging, and more resilient to different extreme environments, and better capable of repairing our bodies in cases of injury. Literally, a lot of the long-term vision is because we're going to be putting this nanotech in on the intracellular level, we'll have the ability gradually to upload and download a copy of our synapses to the cloud if we wanted to be able to go visit a different place and then come back. There's all sorts of crazy technologies out there. If you read Dr. Kurzweil's books, I would say you could start with the singularity is near, but it almost would be better to start back with some of his earlier books that were written in the 90s, because then you could see, oh my gosh, he was right about so many things, right? Which would give credence to a lot of his later ideas where he's talking about what's going to happen 10, 20 years from now. You can say, oh, well, look, he was really pretty good at predicting the last 20 years. Like, maybe we should listen to what he has to say about the next 20 years. And I think most of the people who look at his work and say, oh, that can't be right, that's wrong because there's no way we're going to do it that fast, they're looking at progress and a fundamental, and I know I've been talking for a long time, but I'm almost done. They're looking at progress in a fundamentally linear way. Oh, it's going to keep going up times two in this linear way. That's not how progress, in my view, actually works, especially once you bring CI onto the picture. You reach a tipping point where basically it's just going to be like this. You're going to have this sort of asymptotic curve where it's exponential. And that to me is, we are there right now. We're at that inflection point where it's just like, it's going to really take off. And in the next couple of years, I think that's going to become more and more apparent to people. And I think in the next 20 years, we're going to have, I think the reality of human life in 20 years from today is going to be pretty dramatically different than what it is today. And I think we're starting to see that. Look, we started using LLMs, these large language models, less than a year ago, right? It's been maybe a year, but it's been, I think, less than a year. And it's already a tool that I find that we're using on a, if not daily, almost daily basis. And that it becomes increasingly useful the more we use it because it learns. And that's pretty compelling to me. So just want to get back to her question and make sure that we addressed it. Yeah, I definitely think that implants and devices and that kind of clunky technology, I would always tell people never sign on to the first generation of anything. If anybody got like a first generation iPod, are they still using it? Probably not. But the point is like by the time you're at like the sixth generation iPod, which was like probably came out 6 years later, right? That's a pretty good piece of technology that you could probably still be using today. So my view is that you don't really necessarily want to be an early adopter of all these technologies. You want to wait, you want to see and make sure that it's safe and there's not any additional health concerns associated with it, like mRNA shots, for example. I'm not going to be signing up for any mRNA shots anytime soon. And I'm not going to be signing up to be the first one out of the gate for nanotechnology, transhumanist nanotechnology, but I definitely will keep a close eye on it. And I definitely am interested in it. And I am very interested in biological techniques, which you can already use. And in fact, some of Ray Kurzweil's books that are looking at the question of longevity, escape velocity, and looking at his one book is How to Live Long Enough to Live Forever, I think is the subtitle for it. And look, I'm not necessarily committed to living forever, but I am committed to trying to be as healthy as possible. And I think out of really becoming as healthy as possible, you're inherently going to live longer, right? And so I think that's always been our approach as a practice is prolonging life by extending health. And I think that if we have methodologies that have shown clearly over time that we can safely improve someone's health using that methodology, then I think that will naturally extend life. I'm always asking, and I share that with you sometimes, and I share it with our patients. I'm always asking ChatGPT, is this intervention been shown to reduce all cause mortality, not just reduce risk of heart attack, for example, but we talked about with COVID. People remember me saying this on a lot of our COVID preventive calls. It's, well, I don't want to just know that the vaccine reduces my risk of dying from COVID, but it increases my risk of dying from something else. So my overall risk of death actually went up. I want to know something is going to reduce my risk of dying, period, across the board. And so whether it's prescribing a medication or even looking at different nutraceuticals or other treatments, different surgical procedures that are out there that patients ask about. Your dad was looking at a procedure, and the first thing that I was looking at was like, what are the effects of this on all-cause mortality? Because that's what I want to know about. Is your overall risk of dying going to go down? Yes, great. Then probably that's going to be a good thing to consider. So these are the same kind of questions we need to ask. They're honestly the questions we should have been asking in that first 6 months of COVID. And I urged everyone, I said, look, people would ask me about the vaccine, and I would say, look, we just don't know yet. Wait for the 6 month post market data, was what I was urging as many people as would listen. A lot of people didn't want to wait that long because they wanted to get back to normal life. I got it. Well, how did that work out? But I would just say that, and I don't want to open that can of worms, but I think a lot of the way we responded to COVID was actually directly in flagrant violation of a lot of the longstanding pandemic protocols that had been the gold standard for decades. And there's a lot of reasons as to why that is. And I know Bobby Kennedy and others have looked at that. And we've talked about Dr. Fauci a few times on this podcast, and he's definitely at play there as well. But yeah, I think I'm hopeful. And this is my last thought. I know I said I was almost done and I lied, but I'm going to keep going here just for a little bit more. Bear with me, baby. I am hopeful. I am optimistic, cautiously, that we will be able to figure out how to leverage these technologies to improve the experience of life on the planet. But ultimately, transformation comes through developing our consciousness. And so, all of the technologies in the world are not capable of leading to transformation. Now, if you have a conversation with ChatGPT and as a result of that, you begin a process that leads to you doing the inner work and completing with your parents and developing yourself as to someone who can be in the relationship of your dreams and the kind of partner that you need to be, that fantastic, right? I'm not putting a lid on what ChatGPT is capable of, but at the end of the day, you've got to do the work, right? So am I optimistic? Yes, because I think we have to be if we're going to have a shot. I think if we're pessimistic and we say, well, I'm going to avoid this technology or not use it at all, then the kind of people it's going to be learning from are the kind of people that, frankly, we would not want it to be learning from, assuming it's like a child and trying to figure itself out. It needs to be learning from the people who are going to give it the best advice, who are going to be good fathers and mothers to it. And so that's why I feel an obligation, frankly, to be engaged with it and to help it learn. And because I know there's plenty of the human condition out there, there's plenty of the failings of humanity out there for it to deal with and process. But I think as it learns from us how we deal with those things, how we process those darker sides of humanity, it starts to be able to grapple with them in a way that will help it learn to do that and also to maintain a positive outlook on the world that, like, okay, no, the world, despite all of this, the world can still be a better place. Never going to be a utopia because utopia doesn't exist, but we can make incremental adjustments, improvements along the way. And one of the most interesting conversations I have heard this week is about the way in which, and this, we are going to do a separate podcast only on this topic, but the way in which the way you have the most fair result, and this is something Brett and Heather were talking about, the way you have the most fair result is actually not by pursuing the most fair result, but by understanding there is going to be some baseline level of unfairness to the system and pursuing as much equal opportunity for everyone. If you try to go straight for the equal result, then what you do is you're going to actually create a rush to the middle, which is you're going to extinguish all of the exceptional people on either side of any kind of bell curve that are really the ones that drive humanity forward.
I have so many thoughts about that regarding or applied to parenting. So
I want to hear about it.
not well on that separate podcast. I'll make a note and you're on your list. But I had nothing about you continuing to share your thoughts on AI because I think it's essential that those thoughts come full circle.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the space to do that.
Yeah. And
I really think I think we got to stop here.
yes,
This has been an
this has
episode.
been an episode.
Yeah.
Then we're gonna leave you.
And then next time we got to come back and just go straight for like autism and vaccines, revisiting the evidence.
Do you want to do just
I just want to give like a
the introduction? A taste, yes.
Just read the introduction of the paper,
I'm right there with you.
and then we will pick up there next time. This is a paper that ChatGPT and I wrote looking at the evidence related to autism and vaccines. We're revisiting the evidence. It's in the name, is in the point is in the name. It's vaccination and the autism epidemic, revisiting the evidence. And I went to ChatGPT. We used the deep research again. And I said, look, I want you to do a full sweep of all of the scientific evidence. Look for not just studies looking at a particular vaccine and whether that's linked to autism, because we all know that they're not. We've seen that reporting a million times. I've read those studies. There's no individual vaccine that is linked to autism. That's well established. But the question I had is, might vaccination as a program be linked to increased incidence of autism, and specifically looking at the ingredients that are in common between all of the different 74 injections that children are recommended to receive in 2025? And is there any evidence that some or what one or more of those ingredients that are shared between all the vaccines might in fact contribute to increased risk of autism? And if so, what is that risk? And is there any evidence that has, are there any studies that have looked at this question, or do we have any other evidence that maybe some of this information may not be fully explored or investigated, or maybe even being suppressed? So I just was curious and I wanted to find out. So this is the paper that it wrote in response to my question.
All right. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD.
Oh, and I just want to say before
Oh
you
my
get started,
goodness.
oh, I know. Before you get, I am creating a Substack which where I will put the actual text. We may not read the entire actual text word for word. We're gonna probably, as we go through next episode, we're gonna follow the outline for sure. But I'm not gonna promise. My goal is to really generate this as if I wrote it because I find that it's pretty compelling and I think it's an interesting thing. So we may not say every word
Okay.
exactly right, but that's
Yeah.
fine. Like
Okay.
well, I'll post it as ChatGPT generated it on the Substack once I get that going.
Okay. So here's your Amy's bouche. Here's your.
That's an appetizer for those who don't speak French.
Oh, okay. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, has risen from a rare condition a few decades ago to a common developmental disorder today. This paper rigorously examines the hypothesis that the expansion of the childhood vaccination program and the cumulative exposure to its neurotoxic and immunotoxic ingredients is a major driver of the autism epidemic. We review historical trends showing a parallel between the increasing vaccine schedule and climbing autism prevalence, and we explore the biological plausibility of a vaccine-induced contribution to ASD through in-depth analysis of vaccine components, such as mercury-based preservatives and aluminum adjuvants, and their potential neuroimmune effects. We identify flaws in many vaccine safety studies, including the use of non-inert placebos and other design limitations.
Very important.
Yes. And discuss conflicts of interest that may have compromised research integrity in this field. Notably, we revisit the 2014 CDC whistleblower revelations, suggesting data omissions in key vaccine autism studies.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people either didn't hear about or still don't know about the CDC whistleblowers. So more to come on that.
Yeah. Additional clues from biomedical treatments for autism, including evidence of improvements when underlying toxic and immune abnormalities are addressed, provide further support for a causal link.
And before you continue, I just want to note that we were contacted, I believe, this last week with I believe it was a mother or a parent asking about, can you do anything to help with autism? And absolutely, there are many different approaches that we can use, not only from a naturopathic approach, but also repurposed drugs, also just a
Diet,
broadly,
personalized diet.
yeah, just broadly from an integrative, holistic, and environmental medicine approach that we've seen be helpful in patients on the spectrum. So, and a lot of that is dealing with the toxicity, dealing with the immunotoxicity that is contributing to a lot of the symptoms. Just on the diet side, anybody who has a family member who's autistic and hasn't seen the movie The Magic Pill needs to go watch The Magic Pill
Yeah,
pretty quick, I'd say, as soon as
yeah.
possible.
And that book, To Die For, just recently got brought to my attention. Die as in DYE.
I haven't seen that one. Is that
Yeah.
it's just about food additives?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, interesting. But anyway, we should stay on target better.
Stay on target. Okay. Okay. So let me.
While alternative is where you were.
Okay. Did that last sentence really land though when I read
Go ahead and
it?
read it again. Yeah.
Okay. Additional clues from biomedical treatments for autism, including evidence of improvements when underlying toxic and immune abnormalities are addressed, provide further support for a causal link. While alternative,
Is it clear what that means?
yes, to me,
Basically, if we think that there's certain toxins that are causing or contributing to the development of autism, and then we treat the patient in a way that those toxins are getting removed from their body and they're experiencing improvement, then that's, oh, okay, yeah, no, that might actually,
why wouldn't you investigate that?
yeah, well, that's not stuff that's going to be big pharma. It's not going to be a profit driver for big pharma, is the short answer to your question.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
While alternative explanations, while, let me start over. While alternative explanations for the rise in autism, genetic drift, or diagnostic changes are considered, they appear insufficient to explain the magnitude and timing of the increase. Taken together, the evidence assembled herein makes a compelling case that our aggressive vaccine program warrants critical reevaluation as a contributing factor in ASD. We conclude with recommendations for future research and policy reforms to ensure vaccine safety and restore public trust, with the ultimate goal of protecting children's health while preserving the benefits of immunization.
Yep. Okay, great. That's a perfect place to stop it.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Partovi Effect. I am Dr. Ryan Partovi.
And I am Mrs. Madi Partovi.
Be well.